this choice before you right now. We're either going to return to taking kids from their families, deporting the parents back to the very country from which they fled, visiting cruelty and torture on those kids and families. We're either going to be walls, Muslim bans, we're going to be defined by our fears and paranoia, or we're going to return to who we are. We're this proud immigrant story, state, and experience, and it is the very source of our greatness as Texas, as a country.
The Texas Senate race is one of the pivotal races that could determine control of the United States Senate. While over on the House side, a brand new NBC News poll shows that Democrats have a 7-point advantage going in among likely voters. Joining me now, Tiffany Cross of the Beat DC, which you should be reading every morning. And Jason Johnson of theroot.com, which you should be reading right after that. Thank you guys for being here. And you know me promoting The Root when I used to work for the Grill. That's big.
I'm very happy about that.
Okay, I'm generous with it. Okay, so, all right, friends, let's talk about this real quick. Texas, are you guys as pessimistic and as sort of, people are saying, oh, Beto's, that seems wonderful, but he's not going to win. Are you guys on that?
Oh, yes, I've always been there.
You've always been there. But you're so cynical.
Yeah,
right.
I'm the numbers guy. I mean, look, he's closing, and it's great that he's only down by 3, but it's still Texas. His only saving grace is this idea that you have so many overperforming early voting districts, and I think a lot of pollsters don't know what the likely voters are going to be in 2018, and that may end up saving him. But I wouldn't put any money on Beto O'Rourke.
But that last thing you said is why I'm skeptical of the polling, because you can't poll these rural districts. There are a lot of black voters who are not getting polled. I think those polls are undercounting. He's been laser focused on getting African-American votes, not just Hispanic voters out.
I agree. And there's a NALEO poll that shows that over 60% of Latino voters have never been contacted by a major campaign. So I'm not putting a lot of credence in the polls. Over 40% of Texas voters have already cast their vote.
Right.
Now, I will say, since they're polling so closely, you do have to look at some of the irregularities. And there have been a few counties in Texas who've said the electronic voting has switched their votes.
When they vote straight ticket.
Right. When they vote straight ticket, in some kind of way it switches it to cruise. And when they're polling that closely, that's kind of a big deal. And even the manufacturers of those machines have said it's like calling Apple right now trying to get service for your iPhone 1. You know, so that's a major issue when they're polling that closely. But I'm actually not counting out Beto, and I just want to remind everybody that Jason was counting out Stacey Abrams when we were on this very show.
If you were a naysayer, let's go to Georgia. Let's go there. Let's go there. You were skeptical.
So I have altered my skepticism about the Abrams
Was it because
campaign.
Twitter came for you?
Well, that was part of it. And my friends in Atlanta. This is what the numbers last week: 600,000 early voters who didn't vote in 2014 or who have never voted before. That's amazing. And those people are not people that Brian Kemp has been reaching out to. And I think there is a very good chance now in Georgia that we could end up in a runoff. That's an improvement.
Well, a runoff is not good for the Democrats, though, in that, because Brian Kemp controls it.
He would control the runoff, but given the fact that it's an incredibly red state, that would be a success. A runoff, anything could possibly happen. But there's just no way. There's not been any poll. They have been tied for 2 months, and Kemp has never been able to.
He's never led. All right, native Georgian, what's going to happen in Georgia?
I'm calling it for Stacey for the same reasons. I think there are so many untapped voters who the pollsters aren't necessarily paying attention to, who fly below the radar. And look, we were all just in Atlanta. You'll be back there tomorrow. And the enthusiasm that you see, not just in Atlanta, but she's done a great job of reaching out across the state. And not just, a lot of people have this notion that she's reaching out like she's the black woman voter. And even though black women voted overwhelmingly in the primary, it was up like over 40%. She's done a great job of reaching across the aisle to some of these conservative voters who are unhappy with some of the rhetoric they hear coming out of the Trump campaign. So I think she has great potential, and I'm bold enough. I'm calling it for her. I'm being optimistic, and I'm saying she's going to win.
I was in Macon for her. I was in Macon, following the campaign there, and the enthusiasm is incredible, even outside of Atlanta. All right, let's go on to Claire McCaskill. This is actually a race where Claire McCaskill, the senator from Missouri, she is in danger. And she's trying a gambit in the end to sort of turn against the migrants. She's doing that strategy. I've just heard from friends, in Missouri that she might be struggling with getting out the African-American vote a bit. What's going on with that race?
She's done. She's done. And I think every single African-American activist and political organizer that I know down there, they haven't forgiven her since Ferguson. I mean, that may seem like an old term, but people have looked at Claire McCaskill's behavior over the last several years, and you can't win as a Democrat in the Midwest if you don't have huge turnout and enthusiasm from the African-American vote. I think she's done. I think Heidi Heitkamp is done. I think Republicans are actually going to gain seats in the Senate.
Interesting, because, you know, with Claire McCaskill, she's always done. Like, every time she runs for re-election, she's supposedly done. The polls show her down. She manages to squeak it out. But I do have that question of whether, in a state like Missouri, you need the black vote. You really need it. And her strategy of trying to close like Joe Manchin probably works in West Virginia, and it's probably smart for him to try to close like a Republican. I wonder if in this current climate, where you have an open progressive in Beto O'Rourke who's running as a progressive and doing really well, whether it works to close Republicans.
So she has committed the cardinal sin that I think a lot of Democrats win when they march this middle-of-the-road campaign where they make this ridiculous assertion to try to appeal to Trump voters. We've already seen there is no penetrating that layer of willful ignorance. Give it up. And so she has actually had a lot of trouble with the black vote, and instead of doubling down on that, she's decided to stay in the middle. And there was a time when she wanted a lot of politicians to sign on to this letter saying, oh, no, we the black people stand with her, and Congressman Emanuel Cleaver would not sign on to that letter. And I think that's a problem for her. And you know, look, whatever happens out of this race, I think it should be a lesson to Democrats that when you try to walk that middle of the road, it does not work.
If my producers could just Google for me how far Missouri is from the southern border, I would love that. Because stop the migrants at the border feels like not a
why are you weighing in on that issue? You don't have to say anything.
They're really not close to the border. Let's go to North. You mentioned North Dakota, Tiffany. Let's go there, because there has been another aspect of voter suppression that we don't talk about enough. We talk about suppression of the African American vote because, of course, this country's history is just really about that, and that fight. But Native American voters are also having a hell of a hard time trying to vote in North Dakota. I wonder whether that ends up actually ginning up their enthusiasm to vote more. I'll start with you.
So this effort of voter suppression has actually had the opposite effect among the Native American community in North Dakota. They, as you know, just to remind the viewers, they invented this rule that you have to have a residential address, which a lot of Native Americans living on reservations don't have that. And so they invented this rule that you can't vote if you don't have it. Well, what has happened since then is in a midterm race where maybe a lot of Native American voters may not have paid much attention, this issue has elevated it to a national issue, and they're seeing enthusiasm and turnout. And I have to say, the Native American community there have fought to the very end. Just last week, a judge unfortunately ruled against them, but this was a judge who was sympathetic, who has ruled in their favor before, and he ruled against them to get this rule overchanged because he said it's too challenging to do it too close to the election. But they have gone out fighting, and I'm sorry, Jason, it's a really huge population there. It's a state that's 95% white, so the Native American vote is huge there. And
it's Heidi Heitkamp's base.
It is her base. It will make the ultimate difference. And you've seen the demographics change in North Dakota. So there have been an influx of a population growth there, but a lot of them are Republicans who are there for in the oil industry. And this is a state that there is no voter registration. You don't have to register. So it's a hard one to call. I'm going to counter Jason's cynicism and say I am not counting Heidi Heitkamp yet, because she's another one that people say she's done, and she has come through every time. So I'm not counting her out yet.
Look, I think it has been amazing. And if there's one lesson that I hope that we've all learned from this election, it's that, you know, voter suppression is national, It's not just a Southern thing. It's not just a Texas thing. It happens all over. The fact that many Native American groups have been able to get IDs, but then we're faced with whether or not they use blue ink or red ink. I mean, you literally had people being told that they couldn't vote in the wrong kind of ink. It leads to enthusiasm. But at the end of the day, the Republicans have been very enthusiastic about their Senate choices. That's why I'm saying, like the House races, yes, I think the Democrats are going to do very well in the House. But ever since Kavanaugh, the Republicans got a bump in their enthusiasm for their Senate candidates, and that bump has not diminished at any point in the last 6
And it's also negative enthusiasm about trying to counter the rise of voters of color. I want to go back to Georgia for a second. Kemp's office, the current Secretary of State, has opened an investigation of Georgia Democrats after an alleged hacking attempt to hack the state's voter registration system. I'm un poquito skeptical.
I mean, are the cops going to come to his house? Because if there's anyone who looks like they've had a history of trying to finagle voting in Texas, finagle voting in Georgia, it's Brian Kemp's office. Remember, this is a guy who sent the police to investigate and arrest people in southern parts of the state for trying to register people to vote because they got a black, I think it was a school board in a particular part of the city.
He's been pretty blatant.
This is shenanigans. And what it boils down to is a candidate who's afraid. And you know what? Every losing campaign acts the same. they get nervous, they get desperate, they get more aggressive. He's already backed out of a debate today so he can go hang out with Trump in the southern part of the state. This kind of last-minute investigation isn't going to do anything. Either he's going to win or he's going to lose. Like I said, I don't think he's going to win on Tuesday night, but it's this kind of behavior that turns off a lot of independent voters because they don't want to see a Secretary of State acting like Chief Justice and running around and trying to arrest people for voting.
And we've seen it in Kansas. We've seen it in Ohio, where John Husted is running for lieutenant governor. A lot of people who happen to be in a position to suppress the vote then turn around and try to run for governor or lieutenant governor. Last thing before we go, I'm going to ask you guys to make a call on the Florida Senate, Florida governor. Who wins Florida Senate and Florida governor?
I think Gillum wins, and I think he's going to carry the Senate race along with him, not because the campaign has been necessarily run, but I think he's getting a free ride to the Senate on Gillum's coattails.
Getting a free ride for the astronaut. What's your call?
I'm saying Gillum and Nelson. I think Gillum's going to drag Nelson over the line, despite the fact that apparently he had a rally yesterday with Jimmy Buffett, and Jimmy Buffett has a horrible record of predicting winners. But I do think Gillum's going to
Jimmy
pull
Buffett. His music is very soothing.
It was very soothing.
It's very soothing. Tiffany will be back at our next hour. We're taking the cynical man, and maybe somebody take him to brunch. Somebody take Jason to brunch and cheer him up.
I got to go by the numbers.
Coming up.